Joining us now is the president of the Centre of the American Experiment, John Hinderaker, and Signal principal and pollster, Nick Weinstein. Thank you both so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Let's start with Ryan Routh, the man, of course, who tried to assassinate Donald Trump. He has been sentenced to life in prison. He was found guilty of attempting to assassinate Donald Trump on his golf course in West Palm Beach in September 2024. John, this was, of course, the second assassination attempt that the president faced in the space of just a couple of months in 2024 during the election campaign. What are your thoughts on this sentence being handed down today?
Well, the sentence is certainly appropriate, Gabriella, but what I would emphasize is that there was hardly any press coverage of this trial. Routh represented himself. He gave an opening statement in which Routh, the attempted assassin, kept talking about Adolf Hitler, and the judge finally cut him off. But what that shows is that Routh had absorbed the slanders the top Democrats have continually hurled at Donald Trump, saying he's just like Hitler, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, another Hitler. They say those things every day. And Ryan Routh apparently believed them. If you took the Democrats seriously, you should try to assassinate Trump. It makes perfect sense. You should be viewed as a hero. And I think that's the untold story of this case.
Nick, do you agree with that? I think it's an interesting point that it hasn't really received that much significant media attention. And I'd also argue we don't know a whole lot about him.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And look, I think we're in a time right now where a lot of Americans, people across the world, they like to, get conspiratorial and think that there's things that, the government aren't telling them about, major incidents, particularly, these assassination attempts on President Trump. But I think the reality is a lot more scary, and I don't think the left wants to wake up to it. The fact is, for 8 years, they've compared President Trump to Hitler, and they've in effect said that Republicans are fair targets because of their political beliefs. And it's certainly what spurred, the two assassination attempts on President Trump. It's probably what spurred the assassination attempt on Charlie Kirk as well. And political violence is something that the left is going to have to start to take seriously.
And we just saw how close that first assassination attempt was on Donald Trump's life. The man, Thomas Matthew Crooks, he's someone that we certainly don't know much about at all. Fox News host Brett Baier pressed FBI Director Kash Patel over the lack of detail surrounding Thomas Matthew Crooks, who, of course, attempted to assassinate Trump at a rally in Butler in 2024. Let's just listen to that exchange.
I don't think we, the public, have a more robust picture of that shooter.
Well, I think that's an unfair supposition. We, the FBI, have put out all the information that we possibly and legally can while protecting any ongoing matters that are unrelated.
But he's dead.
Well, yes, he's very much dead. But at the same time, Brett, we at the FBI have to follow the parameters of our investigation and what the law allows us to release.
I get it, but what were the cell phones? Why don't we know who he was talking to? What exactly happened? I feel like we haven't gotten the whole picture about Butler even now.
But here's the thing, Brett. We can provide, and just an example here, we've provided 40,000 pages of documents to Congress. That's a 400% increase from the prior two directors. We will continue to provide this information with our partners on Capitol Hill when we are legally able. It's never going to be enough for everyone. It's never going to be enough. But what we are saying is, we're not saying trust us. We're saying we did an exhaustive search of that.
John, I want to get your thoughts. Look, I agree with Brett. I think it's really, if you look at the coverage last year, it was really the work of Miranda Devine and other journalists to track down Crooks's cyber history. That only came out last year. It seems there's still a lot we don't know.
Well, Gabriella, Republicans in particular think it's bizarre how little we know about Thomas Crooks. We know nothing about what led up to the assassination attempt. We don't know why he did it. We don't know whether there were other people that he was in contact with. I understand the need to investigate and there are legal constraints, but it's been a year and a half with virtually no information made public. And I agree, it's time to learn something about what happened here.
Nick, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I give Kash Patel some grace here because certainly he inherited several cases that had just been completely mismanaged under the Biden administration, both of these assassination attempts being a couple really high-profile ones. But I go back to the point that I made earlier when we were talking about Thomas Ruth. I mean, the reality here may be the scary truth that these are folks that were radicalized online, that they were lone actors suffering from, mental health related issues. And, I think at a certain point, if that's the reality, it's incumbent on us to put that out there and really start to confront Democrats on their rhetoric, because it's radicalizing folks in our backyard and it's spurring them to violence.
Let's turn to voter ID. Nicki Minaj posted on X this week what sensible, forward-thinking, cutting-edge leading nation is having a debate on whether or not there should be voter ID. Like they're actually fighting not to have people present ID while voting for your leaders. Do you get it? Do you get it now? It's interesting. CNN has admitted that the majority of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj here.
83% in the last year of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj. They favor photo ID to be able to vote.
What about by party? What's the party breakdown?
Yeah, normally you might expect, hey, there'd be a big divide by party with Republicans really for it and Democrats really against it. But not really here. I mean, just take a look here. Favor photo ID to vote. You got 95% of Republicans, pretty much all of them, but even 71% of Democrats favor photo ID to vote.
Nick, they're pretty big numbers.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the polls that we've done at Signal, too. It's always in the high 70s to low 80s. This is a bipartisan consensus type issue. And quite frankly, I'm glad that someone like Nicki Minaj, who's not day in and day out in politics, is speaking out about this, because the message that we're hearing from Democrats, it's frankly offensive to suggest that, Black voters and voters of color, can't get an ID, and thus we can't implement voter ID. Americans, we show ID to buy alcohol, to drive, to fly, to exercise our Second Amendment rights, and to suggest that Black voters don't have IDs is just frankly laughable and offensive.
Yeah. John, can I get your take?
Yeah, so Americans have generally lost confidence in the security and the integrity of our elections. And voter ID really kind of is symbolic. It stands for the desire to have more secure elections, and it always polls 75% or better. So why doesn't it pass? The Democrats actually tried to pass legislation to make it illegal for any state to require voter ID. Now, why would they take such an unpopular position? I think the only plausible answer is that voter fraud must be an important part of the Democrats' election strategy.
I want to talk to you both about the Epstein files. Of course, the DOJ released 3 million plus Epstein files last week. It appears as though Trump and JD Vance might have split on what happens next. Trump has said that it's time for the country to get on to something else. JD Vance told the Daily Mail that he'd be open to Andrew, that being former Prince Andrew, testifying before Congress. Nick, with the new release of these files, it's not all the files. There are still some millions actually being hidden away. But with this new release, how is this impacting politics? Do people really care about it, or do they agree with Trump? Do they want to move on?
Yeah, I think the releases thus far have been a major vindication for President Trump. Trump, who basically said, we were going to get into office, we're going to take a look, but concluded that there was really nothing there. I think what we're seeing is that the American voter, they're much more concerned about, the pocketbook issues, the economic issues, that's what's going to drive voters as they go to the polls here in 2026. But I think what's most telling about the lack of, anything in these files is just how quickly the Democrats have moved beyond their Trump Epstein, rhetoric and on to the next, anti-Trump conspiracy du jour. I think this is kind of a nothing burger for the average American, and it is somewhat amusing to me that the three names that are standing out there right now as caught up in the crossfire are Bill and Hillary Clinton, who may be called to testify in Congress, and then of course the former Prince Andrew.
John, what's your assessment, what you're hearing on the ground? Do people want more transparency, a proper investigation for this to continue to drag on? And ultimately, we do need to get to the bottom of it and as much truth as possible. Or do people really want to move on? Are people more concerned with the economy, crime rates? What's your sense on this?
Well, I think most people want to move on. I'm with President Trump on this one. The files do contain evidence of sleazy behavior. They're embarrassing to people like Bill Gates, but I think we should move on to more important issues. This is not a partisan matter. Epstein was a Democrat. His friends were mostly Democrats and academics. He hated Donald Trump, but I don't think there's value in embarrassing public figures. And I think it's time to move on to more substantial issues.
Okay, I want to turn to the growing tensions with Iran. The US and Iran will apparently be holding talks on Friday in Amman, according to CBS News. Now, this, of course, follows an incident earlier this week where we saw the US shoot down an Iranian drone that Caroline Levitt said was acting aggressively towards a US aircraft carrier. Nick, what is happening here? Are the talks breaking down, or are we going to be getting peace, or are we going to be getting war?
Well, I think, President Trump is rightfully emboldened because he's found this America first ability to project power abroad, and is showing the world that America first doesn't necessarily mean America isolated. And, if I'm the Ayatollah in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, I'm not sleeping well having watched what the United States and Israel were able to accomplish on our nuclear strikes on Iran. And certainly after the masterclass that President Trump put on capturing Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, I think somewhat paradoxically, this is the best and only opportunity that the Iranian regime is going to have to make a deal with President Trump. This isn't the Biden or the Obama administration where, they're going to be able to walk all over us and cross red lines. I think Trump's going to come to the table, or his representatives are going to come to the table in Oman, but the Iranian regime is going to have to be willing to make a deal that's not just to address their nuclear program, but also their wanton support of terrorism and their oppression of the Iranian people. And I just don't know if there's a deal to be had there for the despotic leaders of Iran.
Yeah, I don't know either. John, what's your assessment of where things are at the moment and where this is going?
Well, in my opinion, there is no point in negotiating with the mullahs. The Iranian people need regime change, and regime change is very much in the interest of the United States. The question is how to bring it about. Unpopular tyrants can stay in power longer than one would think possible. You look at Cuba, for example. It's very hard to overthrow a government if you aren't willing to use your own soldiers, which Trump clearly isn't. So I don't know whether there's any combination of airstrikes and economic pressure that will cause the mullah's government to fall. I hope so, but on paper, it should have fallen a long time ago. And so we'll have to see how this plays out.
We'll be watching it very closely. John Hinderaker, Center of the American Experiment President, and Nick Weinstein, Signal Principal and Pollster. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.